Welcome to the Asian Supermarket. I'm your host Christina from America.
And I'm Carmen from Australia.
This week on episode 14 of ASM, our friend Vincent joins us. As an American-born Chinese working in the non-profit sector, we discuss the different generational mentalities that Asian people have towards topics such as non-profits, charities, as well as veganism.
So grab your favorite dessert as we chat with our guest in episode 14.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 14 of Asian Supermarket. This week we have our special guest, Vincent. Welcome.
Hi, glad to be here.
Christina, why don't you talk about how you guys know each other?
Yeah, so I think we met 2 years ago through a mutual friend. I thought it'd be pretty neat to bring him on since he works in the nonprofit sector. And then also he's a ABC who's very not in touch with his culture, which is a little different from the usual guests we have on. And he comes from a Hainanese background, which is like the Hawaii of Asia. So that's pretty unique to our show too.
What is your favorite Hainanese dish? That's obviously not Hainan chicken rice because most people know that.
Yeah, so that's a really hard question to answer because it would be Hainan chicken rice because that's the only Hainanese dish I know. Just to let both of you know, like I'd say like very out of touch with my family's Hainanese background.
How about for your parents? Do they have a favorite dish they told you about?
Yeah, they do. So my dad, I actually asked my dad about this and he mentioned favorite dish from Hainan is called like Hainan fin. Mm-hmm. It's just Hainanese noodles. And what they do differently is that apparently it's like fermented rice noodles that are freshly made. And then you have like peanuts and beef and all sorts of garnishes in the dish. And then once you like halfway eat the dish, then you add like clam-based soup. And that's how you finish up the dish.
Have you tried this before?
Never. I've never been to Hainan actually, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They don't cook like the Hainanese food at home, your parents?
They don't actually. I didn't have we had a lot of simple meals growing up at my house. So my parents both worked when I was growing up. So we didn't have like, I actually ate a lot of takeout from restaurants. So no traditional Hainanese dishes here.
It sounds like a mix of like Vietnamese noodle dish plus a touch of Hainan seafood culture, right?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense too.
Yeah.
It makes sense too, right? Considering how close Hainan is to Vietnam and also Singapore. I think actually Hainan chicken rice, I'm not so sure about this, but I think it originated in Singapore. I read about this somewhere.
Wow, because chicken rice is like a super popular thing in Singapore, like super popular. Like a lot of people love the chicken rice in Singapore. And like before when I ate meat, like I had chicken rice in Singapore. It was like my favorite. And then I had like Hainanese chicken rice. And I was like, honestly, I was like, it was pretty similar. So I was like, what's the diff? But obviously as a Singaporean, I do stand by the Singapore chicken rice. Yeah. Although I don't eat chicken anymore. So yeah, that's that.
Me neither. Nice. But yeah, like I read online, and I don't know how true this is. I love food history, so I love reading about this stuff. But I think like a lot of Hainan people like immigrate to Singapore. Actually, from my mom's side, her mom is her grandma is from Singapore. So there's like a lot of like interaction between Singapore, Vietnam, and Hainan, I think.
Then let's get into our fun fact. So dubbed, Hainan is the Hawaii of China. Hainan, which also means south of the sea, consists of various islands. Hainan is the smallest province in the People's Republic of China and is the only place in China which is home to the ancient Li people, an ethnic group indigenous to the islands believed to have originated in the Guangxi region.
Why don't you tell us more about your work? So you do work in a nonprofit?
So I've been working at a nonprofit for the last 3 years now. It's a homeless shelter network nonprofit. And what the nonprofit does is we give homeless families and individuals temporary housing so they can get back on their feet and then eventually find stable housing. What I do specifically, I'm in the fundraising department and I am a data analyst. And what I do is I use data to help our fundraisers raise more money, essentially.
What do you normally what's the main source of, fundraising?
I wouldn't say, I would say there's a big source of money is coming from government. And that's from all levels of government. It's local, state, and also federal. We like to diversify our revenue at Life Moves as well. So we're not just getting money from just public sector. We're also getting money from corporations and also private individuals.
Then what got you into the nonprofit world?
It's like a super long story, but I'm going to try to keep it as concise as I can. I feel like I've always been a very service-oriented person. Essentially, like, I'll just start with like one of my earliest memories. I remember like as a kid, like driving around or in the back seat of my parents' car, like I would peer out the windows sometimes and I would see like, homeless people out on the streets. And, they're on like the highway entrance to the highway and they have like the sign and all that, right? And from a very early age, I felt like that sucked, right? Like I cried when I first saw like a homeless person, right? And I realized, there was something different about my situation versus their situation. So since then, I've always like had this like I've always had homelessness in this issue, the social issue in the back of my head growing up. And even in high school, like there was this homeless guy that was outside of the 7-Eleven I used to go to. And I would just see him outside all the time and I would talk with him. And he would just, we would just talk about whatever. I would listen to him and he had crazy stories. I met him throughout like this 1 year in high school. And I kind of like witnessed him transform as a person. And that was like very inspiring to me. He was, a homeless person, looked really like, not all homeless people are ragged, but he looked really unclean and like in a bad spot. Yeah. And one day, like I bought him Gatorade and, we just talked for a bit and it was a really hot day. And then the next time I met him, like a month later, he was clean. Like his beard was gone. He was wearing like a nice stretch shirt. And he like came up to me. He's like, hey man, like, I like got cleaned up and I'm not drinking anymore. And I got a new job. Like I got a job at this dry cleaner place. And like, he seemed so genuinely happy. Right. And like, inside, like I was like rooting for him and like proud of him as well. Like, wow, like I saw you, really take back your life. And that was like very inspiring to me. So fast forward to college, I did community service, and oh, by the way, like I went to a Jesuit college, Santa Clara University. And if you don't know about the Jesuit tradition, it's very much focused on one of its values is about service. So when I went to Santa Clara, that value like very much resonated with me. I joined like a community service organization there. It just always stayed in my mind, I guess. So when I came out of college, I knew like I wanted to be part of a service industry. And so that's how I like this like homeless issue that I've like been aware of my whole life in the Bay Area, and service, this value of service combined. And that's how I joined Life Moves.
Yeah, that's so cool though, hearing that you have kind of like passion for, social issues. Because I think it's not that common,
Yeah, and when you think Bay Area Asian person, you think they're probably working in tech,
Yeah. No, I mean, I just want to ask you, like, maybe this is a little bit controversial, but like, I want to hear your opinion. There's a lot of people who think that like, oh, homeless people, they are lazy or they don't try hard or things like that. Like, how do you personally feel about, homeless people? Because I'm sure you've been in contact with a lot of them and you've heard a lot about their situations. How do you feel about that perspective when people say like, oh, if they just worked hard enough, if they just did this, if they just did that, they wouldn't be this way?
I think that's pretty ridiculous. It's, and I'll speak about just the Bay Area context because that's what I know. But like to say that these people in the Bay Area who are homeless, the primary reason why they're homeless is because that they're lazy or they don't work hard. Like, I think that's not realistic at all. I think that's it just is character assassination of these people that is unwarranted. So and the reason why I say that is because if you understand the Bay Area local economics and also the housing supply in the Bay Area, it is like there is no housing available, right? And you ask anyone in the Bay Area, like how much does it cost to rent like a 1-bedroom studio? It's ridiculous, right? So essentially, like the homeless people at our shelters are working 2 jobs, right? And are sleeping in their cars, and they're working like 24/7 to try to make a living here in the Bay Area. The reason why they're homeless is not because they're not working hard enough, but because they are economic refugees, because we have failed. The society has failed to produce enough housing for these people.
Have you seen the situation kind of get worse since COVID started? Because, obviously there was the unemployment rate was really high, right at the start of the pandemic.
Even before COVID, it was getting worse, right? If you check the numbers, there's this thing that we do in the US every single 2 years. It's called a point in time count. Essentially, volunteers across the United States go out on one day and they count homeless people. I was actually a part of that in the last point in time count. The result of the point in time count was that homelessness in the Bay Area, let's say Santa Clara County, San Jose, that around this area has gone up like 20 to 30%, right? From 2 years ago. That's a rough estimate. I don't have the exact numbers, so it's really rough. Yeah, even before COVID, things were getting worse. And now it may get even more worse. I don't know. It's not terrible right now because we have moratoriums right now. And if you don't know what a moratorium is, it's essentially, we are actually, the government in California is stopping people from being kicked out of their homes, stopping renters from being kicked out right now. It's building. I think it's building up. So I don't know. In the next few months, we'll find out.
Then what's some differences you see in the East versus West nonprofit work culture? Because I don't know, I haven't seen like a lot of Asian people work in your field, or maybe we're just not, prone to knowing about it. I think we had a chat about this. You're saying like your family donating, stuff like that.
Are there a lot of Asian people working in nonprofit? From my experience, I don't see that many Asian people working on nonprofit. But some do exist, but it definitely is less common. Regarding what you just said, Christina, about charity for Asian communities, what I've witnessed, and I could be wrong about this, but what I've witnessed in our Bay Area community is that I don't think a lot of Asian American, or maybe Chinese American, because I'm primarily Chinese. I don't see a lot of charity being charity isn't really a normal thing, I think, for Chinese Americans. I had a conversation with my mom, and she was talking to her friends, and they eventually stumbled upon the topic of charity. And I was actually the one that convinced my mom to donate some money. And turns out like my mom brought this to her friends, and all her friends have never donated before to charity. I guess charity isn't like a strong phenomena in the Asian community from my perspective. I could be totally wrong on this.
I guess this also ties back into like culture differences, right? Like I think you had a talk with your dad before about it, the different mindsets we have. Do you want to chat a little bit, go, that route?
Yeah, totally. And keep in mind, this is just from a sample size of one, just me and my perspective. So my dad kind of has like a family motto, and we're a little bit of a unique family, so I can't say we're representative of Asian Americans in the Bay, or even Chinese Americans for that matter. But he has a motto, and his motto is show. It's here: safety, health, opportunity, and wealth management. So these are the 4 values that my dad has been like trying to cultivate in me and my siblings as we grew up. What I noticed about these values is that I think it's very immigrant. Like I think it's very survival oriented, right? There isn't a lot of, or there's less room for values such as compassion or charity or greater community.
Definitely. I think, definitely from what you just said, those 4 values, it definitely feels like a mentality that you have when you first move to a new country. You're a minority and you don't speak the language, you don't have as many opportunities, especially, back in the day when, our parents' generation immigrated and there was less Asian people. Obviously, it's getting better as time progresses. You have to understand, it's something that you have to understand that, their mentalities are different. And sometimes the things that we hold true to us, like that we're passionate about, they don't really understand.
And by no means am I saying that like my parents are wrong about their values. Not at all. In fact,
exactly.
I totally admire my parents for how they immigrated to America with nothing to their name and worked really hard and made a living in a survived here, right? By no means are the values wrong. It's just it's a little different from mine.
Well, I think that it's as generations go on, they kind of pave the way for you to have this more compassionate outlook, you know, like you have more resources and, you know, the ability to see things on a different level than them. And they kind of like them coming to America and giving you the opportunities that you had, you know, kind of made you the way you are today, you know? So it's like, I think it's all, and then, you know, the next generation after you, they will have an even more developed, you know, mentality about things, which is it's cool. Did they have any, like, what were their thoughts about you going into nonprofit, and like when you raised these issues with them when you were younger about homelessness and stuff, what did they tell you?
I think my family is a little unique in the sense that I grew up with a lot of freedom, and my parents actually were very supportive of me about in general and everything I did. So like that, I'm like really grateful for my parents. Yep. But they didn't really see the point until later, actually, until later.
Yeah, we were saying earlier the different mindsets, right? Like mindsets, values, differences in work education, hangout lifestyles, mannerisms, you know, all that. So what's in the cultural gaps?
Oh, yeah, here's one. I don't think my parents understand vegetarianism or veganism. By no means am I like a perfect vegan yet. On the path, I want to eventually be vegan. And that is something that has come up like in my family. So my mom, she does cook from time to time, and growing up, like she loved it when I would eat her food, right? Like I was like the trash can of the family because I ate all the leftovers. And but she was, you know, it fills her with joy when I eat her food enthusiastically. Well, now I'm older and now my values have changed, and I want to be more compassionate towards other life on this planet besides human beings. And when she comes to me with a plate of meat now, I have to, you know, decline that. And when I do, that causes like trouble, right? Because now she's thinking to herself, like, why aren't you eating my food? Like, is it not good enough for you? Right? That's like, I would say that's a cultural gap.
I think it's hard as well because I feel like a lot of Asian parents, they express their love in the way of food, you know, they give you food to show that they love you. And it's, I think that also ties in with the like more survival mentality, because when you come to a new country, if you don't have much, you kind of just eat what you're given, right? And maybe like they have that perspective where they're like, you know, you should be appreciative of the food you have. Whereas we're like in the mindset of like, oh, you know, it's a different life if I can survive without it. Like my parents were the same too. So yeah, like at the start when I wanted to go vegetarian, I was really young. So I saw this video and I was like, oh, you know, I don't think I want to keep eating, you know, meat. And they didn't think that I was being serious. So they entertained me for like a few weeks. And then when they realized like, oh, she wants to keep going with it, they were like, you know, this is going to be really hard. But I was like, look, like I can, you know, cook my own meals. I can do things for myself if, you know, if it's going to be hard for you, because I don't think I can ethically keep, you know, eating meat knowing what goes on. When I justified to them from my perspective, they could understand where I was coming from. It wasn't from like, oh, I want to be difficult, you know, and make it hard for you guys. It was like,
yeah, then how do you combat the language barrier? Because you don't speak much Mandarin. How's their, you know, English?
I speak like Chinglish. So it's what's been kind of I think kind of a sad thing, but not too sad thing, is kind of a sad thing about being the son of immigrants is that I grew up like not really absorbing much Mandarin. So my Mandarin is butchered. Like I cannot really form like really sophisticated like sentences or in Mandarin. And I asked my mom actually today, like, Mom, what do you think about my level of Chinese? Like, what would you rank it as? And she said, it's like a kindergarten level Chinese. How do we have those conversations? We don't, right? We don't really have those deep conversations. And when we do, I rely a lot on Google Translate. So I have to like search up a word that I don't know in Chinese. I'll just go to Google. We all go to the computer. I'm like, Mom, this is the word I'm trying to like, you know, this is what I'm trying to say, right? And then she's like, oh, I get it.
I find that my Mandarin is not that great either. Like when I talk to my grandma, like for example, when I explain to her about like why I'm vegetarian or whatever, instead of saying words like, you know, I don't like animal cruelty, I'll be like, oh, I love animals. I don't like hurting animals. You know, like you have to just use the words that you do know to try and get your point across. And then that's why people think it sounds elementary. Did you have a lot of Asian friends, or were you, because I know in America there's like more Asian heavy areas.
The Bay Area, I would say, is a pocket. Like you said, it's a region with a lot of Asians. So gosh, like I grew up, like my formative years, like I grew up with just all Asian people. So from kindergarten, preschool, all the way to, I'd say, senior year of high school, all my friends, all the people I knew were just Asian people. And then when I went to Santa Clara University, that's when, still a lot of Asian people actually, but that's when I saw a lot more diversity.
So do you feel like you gravitate towards a more Asian cultural lifestyle nowadays, as you're, aging, getting to know more of your roots, connecting more with your parents? Or do you feel like you're still heavily Western influenced?
I think to answer that question, let me refer to my test score on the rice purity test. So if you don't know about it, there's this like joke purity test based off of like the university or college rice purity test. And essentially it's like, how Asian are you? It's a joke. Don't like have any, don't take it at face value, or like don't give a lot of emphasis on it. But when I took that test, I got a D minus. Like it said, you're totally whitewashed. To answer your question more seriously, I don't really identify as like Asian, if that makes sense. I identify myself as Asian American. Yeah, I would say I'm American first rather than Asian first, because I was born and raised in America. So a lot of Western values, I would say, like I grew up with those. Oh, and also my parents were, because they came here as immigrants and because they were so hardworking, they actually were not very present in my formative years of my life. I'd say kindergarten throughout high school, like I really didn't have a lot of parental supervision or much of it. Don't think they even had the opportunity to or priority to like pass down any like Asian roots to me. You know how like every year there's like Chinese New Year's and there's like or some festival and you eat mooncake? Like I know nothing about like the history or the tradition. All I know is that every year I get to eat mooncake and it's really good. So that's pretty much all I know.
That's so interesting, because for my family we are like that too, because in Singapore actually the holidays and the traditions are quite big, but my parents were really too big on that, and they never really tried to teach us Mandarin or Cantonese when we came over. And what I do know about the language and the culture is mostly what I have like actively went out and tried to learn. So in terms of like holidays and stuff for my family, we didn't really used to celebrate it that much. But as I've gotten older, I like love my culture, and I've like encouraged my family more to get into like New Year's, and then I've kept more of a closer eye on like the traditions. Like there's like the I don't know how you say it, like the 端午节, like the 汤圆 day, and then those things. Like I like keep an eye on these, and I'll to be telling my parents like, oh, today is this day and today is this day. And like I love being in touch with my culture. And even though like I grew up in Australia mostly, I do have a very Western mentality about a lot of things, but I do hope to preserve my culture.
No, I feel like it's similar here too. Like even though we do like Chinese dance, right? But we never wear I don't even own the qipao.
Like
I don't own
the Chinese dress, traditional dress.
I don't own a single one of those. I don't wear red for Chinese New Year. Like we don't celebrate Chinese things heavily too. But then as I grow older, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm like spreading awareness. I'm like telling kids, like you guys need to preserve your cultural roots. And then like for CC, the what is it, the Chinese New Year, every year they have the CCTV shows. I'm telling my family like, let's get ready to watch all the shows, and they're like, why are you watching so many of the Spring Festival? I think it's interesting, like as we grow older, I'm hoping more people are more like this. They want to connect back to their roots, right? Because it's so cool how identity. And then I feel like a lot of the times, especially from my observations at least, during our high school years, we tend to lose touch of it, right? Like we had this in our intro episode where sometimes we might feel uncool, stuff like that, so we hide it. But hopefully, most people can overcome it. And as we gain more exposure nowadays, through, you know, like these podcasts, stuff like that, YouTube, then more people can be like, it's actually cool being Asian American, you know, like keeping these traditional values is actually really cool, right?
That's super interesting. What you brought up, Christina. I think that's so interesting, Christina, how you just mentioned like in high school you thought it was like kind of uncool or being Asian. Is that what you said? Something along those lines?
I feel like from my observations, right, if we were too Asian, meaning listening to, you know, Asian music or wearing like, I guess, attire from Asia, you know, like certain things, right?
Yeah.
Wear tea powder school.
Huh?
Wear the tea powder school.
Wait, what's a tea powder school?
The tea powder, wear the tea powder school.
Oh, shit, you wear tea powder school.
It's like wearing Asian attire to school. I was like, what? But yeah, no, go ahead. Sorry, my bad.
But anyways, like even for dance, you know, like I like hid my identity of doing like Chinese dance, right? Because I feel like people would associate it with like, oh, me being like born and brought, you know what I mean? I don't know why there was that stigma before in school.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Like for us, it wasn't like, oh, we wanted to be another identity, you know what I mean?
It seems kind of like dorky where it's like, oh, exactly. I'm here, like I'm so Chinese, like I love being Chinese. People be like, well, you're a nerd, you know, like it's that kind of thing. Exactly. I understand.
Yeah, like I guess I've never just felt that way. I've always been like, I never felt I had to be different, you know? I never felt, at least in the Bay Area, and that's what I'm really proud of. You know, I'm proud about how I felt very accepted until I guess recently. In the Bay Area, I felt being who I am, like if I liked listening to Chinese music or Korean music or whatever music, that's totally cool, right? I never felt a need to be like, oh, I don't listen to that. And I'm like one of the most, according to the test, like whitewashed Asian. So I don't know. All right.
We should do, I want to do the test. Have you done it, Christina?
Yeah, I've done it. Like,
what are the questions like?
What's your score?
It was, I think I had like a B+ or A-, and then our mutual friend Andy, which is my friend's boyfriend, he had higher than me. So I think, so we're gonna bring him on as a guest for another episode. I think he's like very like Chinese, you know what I mean? Like,
what kind of questions are on this test? I'm curious. I'm gonna go do it.
Like, oh, do you eat rice on a daily? Do you take off your shoes when you go to the house? You know, stuff like that.
When you're at the supermarket, do you slap, you know, the watermelon?
Yeah. Or like, oh, do you take the utensils when you go home? You know, like the prepackaged utensils or sauce packets or napkins, you know, stuff like that.
That's so funny. Like after joining, you know, there's like the subtle Asian traits group on Facebook. After joining that, I realized like how many of the things I do are actually like an Asian stereotype. Like growing up, I didn't have any Asian people around me, so I didn't see it as like, oh, this is such an Asian thing. I just saw it as like, this is a thing that we do. You know, like taking off shoes in the house or whatever, those kinds of things. Like I never saw it as like, this is Asian. I saw it as like, this is just what you do, you know? And then after joining those communities and getting to know more Asian people, I was like, whoa, so all of these things that I do are actually like Asian stereotypes.
Yeah.
And
oh my gosh, I just realized something. Like for Vincent, like you say, you know, you don't have many Asian influences, right? But when he walks into my studio, he takes off his shoes.
It makes sense, right? I don't want to.
It's so funny because like other people, they don't take it off because you know what I mean, right? You go to a house, you might take off your shoes, but he like walks in and he takes off his shoes. I just realized like slowly, you know, these like influences are rubbing off on you.
We don't do that at my house.
But you don't take off your shoes in the house?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I don't. Please don't.
Dang.
We're judging. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But no, I know it's a thing, right? I'm not like, I've always known it was a thing, and I want to be respectful of other people's households. And I see you like at your studio and you work so hard cleaning it. I would feel so bad to like go in with my nasty shoes, you know, like, dirtying up the place.
Why, thanks.
Yeah. I'm thinking of you.
So considerate. Thank you for coming on the show, Vincent. It was nice talking to you, hearing about, you know, the different mentalities that you have and the work that you do for nonprofit. It's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, everybody. Hope you guys had a great time learning about the nonprofit world.
Stay tuned next week for episode 15 with our friend Phelan, a Chinese Taiwanese who was born on the Solomon Islands, migrated to Australia, and is currently a musician.